When you think of some of the most successful combat sports careers, what do you think of? You think of Floyd Mayweather, one comes to mind. Khabib Nurmagomedov, Joe Calzaghe, and also George St. Pierre. You can also add Lennox Lewis and Rocky Marciano to that list. Now, why is it that they have a successful career? Well, simply because they left the game on top and undefeated. Or, in Lennox and George St. Pierre's case, defeated every guy that they had ever faced, whether they had lost to them, only for them to come back and beat them the second time around. So why is this significant? The one thing you got to understand about Tony Ferguson is that he just hasn't had enough. He really doesn't understand that it could be absolutely fatal in his career and in his life if he continues on and takes these fights that really, at this point, he doesn't really need to do other than, of course, money. Now, the problem with that is there is a saying that goes, what are you going to tell a fighter to do if all they knew how to do their whole entire life was fight? And in Tony Ferguson's case, this is absolutely a matter of fact in his life and what is going on in his current circumstances. The guy has clearly taken a significantly amount of damage all throughout his career. He tried to bring in David Goggins only for nothing more than a show, to be quite honest with you. David Goggins is a former Navy SEAL. Some would consider him a war hero. And on top of that, the guy is a social media influencer in terms of motivating people to work out, or in his case, work out even harder, doing extreme levels of, let's say, miles and runs that may be inconducive to the mixed martial arts calendar and daily schedule and what you have to do to train as a professional athlete. So he brings him in because he thinks that he's lacking some brain power of some sort or willpower. And the problem with that way of thinking and that way of narrative that Tony Ferguson is trying to drum up in his head is that he doesn't understand that he's already tough. He's already a world-level mixed martial arts fighter. On top of that, the guy is also highly damaged in his whole entire accumulation of the career that he has spanned on. From the Chandler knockout, you can even add the Justin Gaethje fight. Then you can even add the Donald Cerrone fight. All the other fights that he's had going down all the way to Danny Castillo and going up all the way to Anthony Pettis, he's taken a significant amount of damage to where you really have to be concerned for his life. And the problem with this issue is that it's easier said than done when you're trying to tell Tony Ferguson to quit. Now, why? Well, how are you going to tell somebody to quit whose whole entire ethos and way of fighting and philosophy and discipline is based on never quitting? And although in your prime years of your mixed martial arts and athletic career, this may be conducive to, let's say, the lifestyle that you need in order for you to withstand all the training and all the hours that you have to go through. It's great. You need this. The problem is you're now at the age where a lot of that is really, it's null and voided. Because all the damage that you've had is not going to help you with any toughness that you think you have in comparison to what you once been able to withstand, based on the fact of accumulation of damage and everything in between that you can read with Tony Ferguson's career in terms of why he's significantly damaged and why he can't continue this way. But the other problem is that what are you going to tell him to do? Because the other aspect of this is the addiction of the limelight. Yes, it is that. A lot of people in this particular matter, fighters, they love to believe that they are somehow, how do I say this, different than everybody else. Some fighters are overtly arrogant, and on top of that, overtly aggressive, and then there are some that are, well, covertly one way or the other, right? There's a lot of guys, like, for example, take George St. Pierre, as I've mentioned earlier in this particular content. He's one of the greatest mixed martial arts fighters of all time. But if you look at him, he's a very calm individual. He's very respectful to everybody else. He doesn't step over his boundaries or transgress against anybody. But there's a lot of guys that are like that. A lot of guys are wholesome. A lot of guys are base. A lot of guys are humble. But how are they in real life? That is the two different questions that you have to take into consideration. Because although Tony Ferguson likes to play up this role of, well, I'm just an average guy from Southern California, you have to understand there's a little bit of a smug within Tony Ferguson that tells everybody else, well, I'm better than you, I train longer than you, and this and that. How do I know that? Well, because a part of me, even in my younger days, I don't know about now, maybe a little bit of that, I do sort of feel like, man, you know what? These people aren't working out as hard as me, so therefore, they're no good, or I have some sort of smug attitude about that. It happens. It happens with all guys that are highly athletic, alpha males or sigma males, or whatever category that puts you in a different spectrum outside of society. Tony Ferguson is no different than that. The problem with being so alpha-like and not ever quitting is that you don't know when it's really that bad for you at a certain point, right? Because you got to remember, again, just like the title of this entire content spells that this is going to be very fatal for Tony Ferguson. And I hate to say it in such a grim manner, but these things exist. There was a guy named Ray that I used to train with, a Del Paso Heights fighter out here in Sacramento, back in the 2011-2012s. This guy took on a few guys from Team Alpha Male, a team that I've also trained with, and lo and behold, a few years later, or maybe just a few fights down the road, this guy ended up dying from brain damage, where basically the blood leaked into his brain or something like that. I don't know the full extent of that medical history. Obviously, there's HIPAA laws involved in the United States, but that's neither here or there. The point of the matter is, it was all caused by basically all the injuries, all the fights that he had taken. This guy fought a lot. There were a few fights where he took on 4 guys within a span of a month, so that's 4 fights in a span of a month, and he just kept taking them, and eventually it became very fatal for him. So this is the reality of combat sports as we know it. Conor McGregor has witnessed one of his Portuguese fighters, well, not like he killed him or anything, but obviously he died as a result of the mixed martial arts contest. And I remember Conor McGregor in 2016 felt very hesitant into going back into the world of mixed martial arts, because if you remember, it was a time where he was in between the 2 Nate Diaz fights. He already had the first one, and in the second one, they were trying to build up a rematch of some sort. So he was in between trying to think to himself, you know what, should I retire or should I continue on fighting? And a lot of that really came when he witnessed the man pass away in the cage. So this is a very real sport. Like I've said, I've trained with guys that have died, guys that have been paralyzed, people that have been in serious injuries, or people that are just punch drunk altogether, right? So that's the minimum damage of it all. That's the, I guess, less worst thing that you could possibly deal with in terms of long-term combat sports, pain, agony, damage, and everything in between. But when it comes to the extreme of things, because you have somebody like Tony Ferguson who has a very extreme personality, guess what? This is one of those situations where it can become extremely fatal for his entire career, because, not to go off on a tangent that I had lost earlier, but again, it's the limelight. It's the addiction to that specific lifestyle, well, that gives you all the attention during fight week. The feeling of even just cutting weight and peaking. Let me tell you guys, if you've never prepared for a fight in your whole entire life, you guys are missing out. Because the peak level that you feel in your fight week, I swear to you, it is the greatest high that you will ever experience in your life. If you can emulate that particular high in your life where you are peaking, I'm telling you, you're never going to want to let it go. Even if, let's say, you don't compete anymore, there's going to be times where you're going to have, let's say, an 8-week camp. You say to yourself, well, I'm going to go train hard in this coming weeks, maybe an 8-week course or a 12-week course, maybe even an 18-week course. Nonetheless, you are getting ready for this particular feeling. And then in the last week of it all, i.e. the fight week, whether imaginary or real, guess what? It is the best feeling in the world when you go through those phases of training extremely hard in the beginning of a training camp, and then in the middle of it, basically tapering down or focusing in on the specific matters at hand, which is sport related, the art of mixed martial arts altogether, as opposed to, let's say, the conditioning, the drills, which are long past, way before camp. And then you have the aspect of conditioning. You have the aspect of doing extreme rounds. Some guys will do, let's say, 7 rounds and 7 minutes within those rounds to really build up their particular stamina. Some guys do 6 minutes when you're only doing 5 minutes inside the cage. And then you sort of taper it down to where, let's say, maybe in a fight week, now you're just doing Tabata drills. And if you guys don't know what Tabatas are, it's kind of like going hard for the next 30 seconds, which is a very low impact training. It really boosts your hormones and your HGH based on the explosive activity that you do in those workouts. And then you taper it down. You do less as the fight week comes on. I'm telling you guys, not to go off on a tangent of training camps, but man, I swear to you, it is the most addicted feeling in the world. Even with the training that goes in between, it is the most addictive feeling in the world. You never want to let that go. So can you imagine Tony Ferguson, who's an active fighter, who's been an active fighter, even all throughout the pandemic when everything seemed to have been shutting down, and guess what? The pandemic is literally what had put Tony Ferguson in the back foot of his whole entire career. Let's just really understand the dynamics of that reality, because a lot of people want to just say, well, it was the age or this and that. Yes, that's true. But there are guys that can perform at a high level even when they get older. You guys, a little glimpse of Sacramento right there, you see? So you never know what you're going to get in this particular podcast and this particular content, right? So there it is, Sacramento for you guys as I am crossing the bridge on 50 East or so. So anyways, Tony Ferguson really needs to let go. You guys have to understand that if Tony Ferguson doesn't let go, he's really going to have serious problems in his life and his career. So I think that's really all the end of it that we can do for this particular content. Reason being, it's getting dark and I don't have much light to really go off of. Maybe we could, maybe do this a little bit. That's fine. But like all things related to the subject matter at hand, you got to know when to call it quits. And Tony Ferguson is in this phase of his career right now where he doesn't know how to call it quits, and it could be very fatal for him because of the addiction to the limelight, the addiction to having the cameras in your face during fight week, and on top of that, more importantly, the identity of being a fighter. I got to tell you, there's this one fighter that I know online, right? Nick Ring, right? A Canadian fighter. Very impressive a record, right? Even if he was only let's say a prelims fighter or maybe even a few times a main card fighter in the UFC. What was exciting about him, or what's great about his career, was that he was never finished. Even in his boxing fights, he was never finished. So I suggest you guys check out Nick Ring on his Facebook. I don't know if he's got any other social media or this and that, but me and his brother, we've had a few discussions and a few debates online with political topics and whatnot. But even when I did talk to him in private, he was a very gentleman-like person, right? Very similar to most Canadians. And one thing that I think is important that I took out of a conversation out of him was that he said that once I got done fighting, it was almost like I didn't have a certain identity. So that's another thing that you got to understand with Tony Ferguson, is that he has this identity attached to being a fighter. And that's very problematic in trying to retire on time to where he doesn't suffer any more significant damages along the way. But either way, man, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's getting dark out here in Sacramento. And, yeah, don't forget to tell a friend to share, so that we can make this channel one of the most epic channels of all time, so that I can present to you some of the most epic combat sports news and news around the world, period. Inshallah. Don't forget to like and subscribe.